8 million if my best horse is beaten, said the millionaire to the humble boy, but he surprised him. Richard Thompson never imagined that his Tuesday afternoon would be transformed by a ragged boy who appeared at the entrance of his ranch carrying a lame horse. The businessman was reviewing sales contracts when he heard the commotion at the main gate. "I need to speak with the owner," said the boy, holding firmly the rein of the animal that could barely walk properly. Richard left the office annoyed. He had just closed a $2 million deal with an Arab buyer and didn't want to be bothered by beggars. "What do you want here, boy?" he asked, observing the torn clothes and bare feet of the child. "I want a job, sir. I know how to take care of horses better than anyone." The employees who were nearby began to laugh. Richard looked at the animal the boy was bringing and almost laughed out loud too. It was a brown horse, thin, with a visible injury on the right hind leg. "A job?" Richard crossed his arms. "You show up here with this nearly dead horse wanting a job at the best ranch in the state. My horse isn't dead, sir. He just needs care." "Care?" Richard laughed loudly. "Boy, this animal should be grazing in some abandoned pasture. Not here where we have the best thoroughbreds in the country." The boy didn't lower his eyes. There was something in his gaze that bothered Richard, a determination that didn't match his miserable appearance. "Make a bet with me then," said the boy, surprising everyone. "A bet?" Richard was amused now. "And what do you have to bet besides this crippled horse? If my horse beats your best animal in a race, you give me a job and pay what you think is fair. And if you lose, I'll leave and never come back here." Richard looked around. His employees were clearly expecting him to humiliate the boy once and for all. It was a perfect opportunity to teach a lesson about respect and hierarchy. "You know what? I'll improve your bet," said Richard, walking until he was very close to the boy. "If this horse of yours manages to beat my White Lightning in a race 3 months from now, I'll give you $8 million. Silence took over the place. Even the horses seemed to have stopped moving. "And if I lose?" asked the boy, showing neither surprise nor fear. "You'll work here for free for a whole year, taking care of the manure, washing stalls, doing everything I say." "I accept." The answer came so quickly that Richard blinked twice. He had expected the boy to be scared, maybe even run away, but there he was, extending his thin hand to seal the deal. "What's your name?" asked Richard, shaking the boy's hand without much strength. "Jack Miller, sir." "And where did you come from, Jack Miller?" "From far away, sir. Very far away." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Richard watched the boy walk away carrying his lame horse and felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was as if something from the past had returned to haunt him, but he couldn't identify what. "Boss, you're not really going to let that kid stay around here, are you?" asked Samuel, his foreman for over 20 years. "Of course not, Samuel. I'm going to teach him a lesson that will serve as an example for the whole region. No one comes here to disrespect what I've built." But why then did Richard find himself looking out the office window, watching Jack Miller settle his horse in a small makeshift shelter at the back of the property? And why couldn't he concentrate for the rest of the afternoon? The news of the bet spread through the ranch like wildfire. The employees were talking among themselves, some finding it amusing, others feeling sorry for the boy. No one gave the lame horse the slightest chance. $8 million, murmured Mrs. Hope, the cook who had worked there for decades. "That boy has no idea what he's gotten himself into." Catherine Thompson arrived home that night and found her father in the office, shuffling papers with more force than necessary. "Dad, I heard there was some trouble today at the ranch." "Trouble?" Richard looked up. "Just some cheeky kid who came here thinking he could challenge me." Catherine was 25 and had graduated as a veterinarian 2 years earlier. She knew her father well enough to tell when something was truly bothering him. "And why did that get you so worked up?" "I'm not worked up," lied Richard. "I just don't like people who don't know their place." "What boy is this?" "Just some kid, Jack something or other, showed up here with a horse that can barely stand, wanting to race against White Lightning." Catherine sat in the chair across from her father's desk. Since childhood, she had always been able to read his expressions better than anyone. "And you accepted the bet?" "Of course I did. It will be a lesson he'll never forget." $8 million, Dad? Don't you think that's a bit much? Richard stopped shuffling the papers and looked at his daughter. How did you hear about the amount? Everyone is talking about it. The employees, the people in town. Dad, $8 million is no joke. Don't worry, that boy doesn't stand a chance. But Catherine saw something different in her father's eyes, a restlessness she couldn't understand. The next morning, Jack Miller woke up before sunrise. He had slept beside his horse, as he always did since they had become companions. The animal was lying down, but lifted its head when it felt the boy stir. "Good morning, Courage," whispered Jack, stroking the horse's neck. "Today we're going to show all these people what we're made of." The name Courage had been given by Jack himself on the day he found the animal abandoned on a dirt road almost a year ago. No one else would have believed that injured horse could ever run again, but Jack saw something special in those tired eyes. Catherine arrived early at the ranch that morning. Officially, she was there to help with the routine checkups for the racehorses, but she really wanted to see the boy everyone was talking about. She found Jack in the small back pen, brushing his horse with gentle, caring movements. "Good morning," she said, approaching slowly. Jack turned around, surprised. It was the first time anyone there had spoken to him without a mocking tone. "Good morning, Mum. I'm Catherine, the owner's daughter." The boy immediately grew tense. "Don't worry," said Catherine, noticing his reaction. "I'm not here to bother you. I'm a veterinarian. I just wanted to take a look at your horse, if you'll let me." Jack hesitated. He didn't trust anyone from that family, but there was something genuine in the young woman's voice. "You can look." Catherine approached the animal and gave it a careful visual examination. The horse was clearly malnourished, and the injury on its hoof was old and poorly healed. "How long has he been like this?" "I found him hurt almost a year ago. I managed to care for the wound as best I could, but..." "You cared for it yourself, how?" Jack looked down. "I learned a few things from an old man I met. He knew about plants, home remedies." "Where do you live?" "Around," he replied vaguely. Catherine realized the boy didn't want to give details about his life. She respected that, but kept observing how he treated the animal. There was a connection there that she rarely saw, even among the best riders. "Can I give you a tip?" she asked. Jack nodded. "The water from the main trough has a lot of sedatives. My father uses it to keep the horses calm for buyers. If you want your horse to have energy, you should give him water from the well out back." "Why are you helping me?" Catherine thought for a moment before answering. "Because I think everyone deserves a fair chance." Richard appeared at the fence at that moment, coming straight toward them. "Catherine, what are you doing here?" "I was just watching Jack's horse, Dad." "And what did you think?" asked Richard with an ironic smile. "I think he has potential." Her father's smile disappeared. "Potential? Catherine, that horse can barely walk properly." "Sometimes appearances can be deceiving." Richard looked from his daughter to Jack and back to his daughter. "I want you away from here. This boy needs to learn on his own what it means to challenge people who are far above him." "Dad, that's not..." "Not what? Fair?" Richard laughed. "Fairness is everyone staying in their place. And his place is not here." Catherine left the fence without another word, but gave Jack an encouraging look before leaving. The first days were hard for the boy. The employees completely ignored him, and when they spoke to him, it was only to make jokes about his situation. Jack endured everything in silence, focused only on taking care of Courage. Samuel, the foreman, was particularly cruel. Whenever Richard wasn't around, he made sure to humiliate the boy. "Hey, kid," he shouted on the third morning. "Come clean this stall. Since you're going to work for free for a year, you'd better get used to it." Jack went there without complaining. While cleaning, he heard Samuel talking to other employees. "That boy reminds me of someone," said one of them. "I think so too," Samuel agreed. "There's something about him that..." "That what?" "I don't know. But the boss got really strange after he showed up here." "Strange how?" "Nervous. Like the boy had dug up something he wanted to forget." Jack stopped cleaning for a moment. There was something about that conversation that caught his attention, but he couldn't understand what. At night, alone with Courage, he began working on the animal's recovery. He had learned a lot from his Tony, an old cattle driver who had taken him in for a few months before passing away. Tony knew about herbs and medicinal plants that worked miracles with injured horses. "Let's take it easy, Courage," he whispered while massaging the animal's injured hoof. "We have 3 months to make you strong, and I promise we'll make it." Catherine watched from afar whenever she could. She had been impressed with the boy's dedication, and against her father's orders, decided to help him discreetly. She started by leaving higher quality feed in the corral during the early hours. Then, she began hiding veterinary medicines in the hay. Jack found everything, and though he didn't know who was helping, was grateful. A week passed. Richard noticed that the boy's horse was looking slightly better, which irritated him deeply. "Samuel, that kid is getting help from someone." "How so, boss?" "His horse is improving. Someone is giving him food and medicine." "Want me to find out who it is?" "I do. And when you find out, fire them on the spot." Samuel began watching the employees, but couldn't discover anything. Catherine was very careful and always left things when she was sure no one was looking. Jack noticed he was being watched more closely, but continued with his routine. He got up before dawn, took care of Courage, did basic walking exercises, and then helped with the heavy work around the ranch. It was during one of these mornings that he made a discovery that would change everything. He was giving water to Courage when he noticed that some of the ranch's racehorses seemed slower than usual. They were high-quality animals, but were moving as if they were sleepy. Curious, Jack went to the main water trough and noticed a slight, unusual smell in the water. It wasn't something anyone would easily notice, but he had developed sharp senses during his months of life on the roads. That night, he waited until he was sure everyone had left and went to investigate. He found small bottles of sedative hidden near the water supply system. "So this is how they keep the horses calm," he murmured to himself. But who was doing this, and why? The next morning, Jack Miller discreetly observed the employees' routine. That's when he saw Samuel putting a few drops of a clear liquid into the water trough. In the afternoon, when Samuel was alone taking care of the horses, Jack approached him. "Mr. Samuel, may I ask a question?" The foreman turned around, irritated. "What do you want now, kid? Why do you put medicine in the horse's water?" Samuel froze. His expression changed from irritation to something close to fear. "What are you talking about? I saw you putting some drops in the water trough this morning." Samuel looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "Listen here, boy. You didn't see anything, understand? But why do you do it?" "Because—" Samuel hesitated. "Because the boss orders it. The buyers like calm horses, easier to handle. It's just to make them more docile." "But isn't that harmful to the animals?" "Of course not. It's just a small dose, doesn't do any harm." Jack knew Samuel was lying about it not being harmful, but he realized the man was genuinely worried about being discovered. "I won't tell anyone," said Jack. "I just wanted to understand." Samuel watched him for a moment, trying to decide if he could trust him. "Look, boy, between you and me, I don't like doing this, but I've worked here for 20 years and I need this job. The boss isn't the type who accepts questions." "I understand. You'll learn that yourself in the next 3 months. Richard Thompson doesn't like to be contradicted." That night, Jack had a long conversation with Courage. "Now, I understand why the horses here are so slow during training," he said, stroking the animal's neck. "They're being sedated, but that means at race time, when they're not taking the medicine, they'll be much faster." It was valuable information, but also worrying. Jack knew White Lightning was naturally an exceptional horse. If on top of that he was being kept artificially calm during training, his true speed in the race would be even greater than it appeared. Catherine continued to help Jack secretly, but noticed her father was growing increasingly suspicious. Richard had installed new cameras at the ranch and was always watching the employees. "Dad, don't you think you're overdoing it with this boy situation?" she asked during dinner. "Overdoing it? Catherine, I built this ranch from scratch. I won't let some kid destabilize everything I've achieved. But he's just a child, and he's clearly in need." "In need?" Richard slammed his fork on the plate. "He should have thought of that before coming here to challenge me." "Dad, sometimes you act as if you're afraid of him. Richard stopped eating and looked at his daughter with an expression she had never seen before. Afraid? Why would I be afraid of some street kid? I don't know. It's just a feeling. Well, get that feeling out of your head. And one more thing. I want you to stay away from that boy. I don't want to see you talking to him or helping him in any way. Why? Because I said so. And as long as you live in my house and work at my ranch, you'll do as I say. Catherine didn't reply, but she made a decision right then. If her father was forbidding her from helping Jack directly, she would have to find another way. The next day, she sought out Mrs. Hope in the kitchen. Mrs. Hope, I need a favor. You can tell me, dear. Do you know the boy who's camping out back, Jack Miller? Yes, I know him. Poor thing, always hungry. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. My father forbade me from helping him, but you want to help anyway. Yes, could you bring him some food and maybe some medicine for the horse? Mrs. Hope smiled. Of course, dear. That boy reminds me so much of someone I knew many years ago. Who? Oh, that's an old story. But I will help him. From that day on, Mrs. Hope began bringing food to Jack Miller every night. The boy was surprised by the lady's kindness, who always came accompanied by stories about the ranch and the old days. Mrs. Hope, have you worked here a long time? Asked Jack Miller one night. 42 years, my boy. I saw this place grow from nothing. What was it like before? Oh, it was very different. Richard Thompson's father was a good man, fair to the employees. When he passed away, his son took over and changed a lot of things. What kind of changes? He became harder, more distrustful, especially after that incident with the trainer. What trainer? Mrs. Hope hesitated, as if she had said more than she should. Oh, that was a long time ago, a sad situation, a good man who left unfairly. What happened? Better not talk about these things, my boy. The past is sometimes best left where it is. But Jack Miller became curious about the story. There was something in the way Mrs. Hope spoke that deeply intrigued him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the weeks passed and Courage was showing impressive improvement. The injury to his hoof was healing well and the animal had gained weight. More importantly, he was showing an energy and liveliness that even surprised Jack Miller. Richard Thompson noticed the horse's transformation and grew increasingly irritated. He had expected the animal to get worse or for the boy to give up, but the opposite was happening. Samuel, I want you to cut off the water supply to the boy's paddock. Boss, isn't that a bit what? Cruel? Richard Thompson laughed coldly. He chose this challenge. Now he has to deal with the consequences. Samuel did as he was told, but felt bad about it. He was already starting to sympathize with the boy and admire his determination. Jack Miller noticed the water had been cut off, but didn't complain. Instead, he started carrying water from the river that ran 2 kilometers away. It was exhausting work, but he made sure to keep Courage well hydrated. Catherine Thompson found out what her father had done and was furious. Dad, this is inhumane. Cutting off the boy's water. Inhumane is someone coming here, thinking they can challenge me without consequences. He's a child. He's a boy who needs to learn about respect and hierarchy. What if he gets sick? What if the horse gets ill? His problem. Should have thought of that before. Catherine Thompson left the room slamming the door. She was beginning to see a side of her father she didn't know and didn't like. That night she sought out Mrs. Hope again. I need you to take more water to Jack Miller. My father cut off the supply. I already know, dear. That boy has been going to the river for water every day. To the river? But it's kilometers away. Yes. And he goes on foot, carrying buckets. Comes back all sweaty and tired, but never complains. Catherine Thompson felt a mix of admiration and anger. Admiration for the boy and anger at her father. Jack Miller didn't know it, but his determination was beginning to impress some people at the ranch. Several employees who initially mocked him now watched him with respect. Look at that, the kid doesn't give up, commented one of the handlers. I'll say, in his place I would have left a long time ago, said another. I think he really does have courage. The horse's name isn't for nothing. Even Samuel was changing his opinion about Jack Miller. One morning, when he was sure Richard Thompson wasn't around, he approached the boy. "Jack Miller, can I give you a tip?" "Of course, Mr. Samuel." "For training, use the backtrack. It's smaller, but the terrain is better for strengthening your horse's legs." "Thank you. But why are you helping me?" Samuel thought for a moment before answering. "Because you remind me of someone who worked here many years ago. A good man who was treated unfairly." "Who was that person?" "A trainer. The best I've ever seen in my life, but the boss... Well, never mind, just use the backtrack, okay?" Jack Miller nodded, but grew even more curious about this story of the mysterious trainer. That afternoon, he decided to explore the property better. That's when he discovered an abandoned barn at the back of the ranch. The place seemed not to have been used for years, covered in dust and spiderwebs. Inside the barn, he found old training equipment and several stacked boxes. Curious, he opened one of them and discovered documents and old papers. Among the papers, he found something that made his heart race. Old photographs of the ranch and, in several of them, a man who looked very much like himself. The photos showed the man working with horses, always smiling, always surrounded by people who seemed to respect and like him. In one of the photos, he was next to a horse that was almost identical to Courage. Jack Miller turned the photo over and found a note. "Anthony Miller, the best trainer who ever passed through here. 1998. Miller, the same last name as his." With trembling hands, Jack Miller continued searching through the boxes. He found more photos, work documents, and even some handwritten notes about training techniques. In one of the last boxes, he discovered something that left him in shock, a personal diary. He opened it to the first page and read, "Diary of Anthony Miller. I hope one day to pass this knowledge on to my grandson, Jack Miller." The boy sat on the barn floor holding the diary with both hands. His grandfather had worked at that same ranch. His grandfather had been a trainer there. He flipped through the pages quickly, finding detailed accounts of training techniques, about the horses, about life on the ranch. But he also found something darker. The last pages spoke of problems, of unfair accusations, of a forced departure. "Richard Thompson accused me of stealing money from the property. I couldn't prove my innocence and was forced to leave. I leave this place with a broken heart, knowing I will never see the horses I love so much again. I hope that one day the truth comes out and my name is cleared." Jack Miller closed the diary and leaned his head against the barn wall. Now he understood why Richard had been so disturbed by his arrival. Now he understood why several people had said he reminded them of someone. He was the grandson of Anthony Miller, the trainer who had been unjustly expelled from the ranch 15 years ago. But there was something more. If his grandfather had been innocent, who had really stolen the money? And why was Richard so sure of Anthony's guilt? Jack Miller spent the rest of the afternoon reading the diary. He discovered that his grandfather had developed revolutionary training techniques and that some of the ranch's current champion horses were direct descendants of animals he had trained. Even more shocking, White Lightning was the great-grandson of a horse that Anthony Miller had personally trained. When he returned to Courage, Jack Miller looked at his horse with new eyes. If his grandfather's notes were correct, Courage also had blood from the same lineage as White Lightning. "So that's it, Courage," he whispered, stroking the animal. "We're family. You, me, White Lightning, all connected by Grandpa Anthony's work." But Jack Miller knew he couldn't reveal that yet. He needed more information. He needed to better understand what had happened 15 years ago. In the following days, he began to observe Richard Thompson with new eyes. He tried to understand the man who had destroyed his grandfather's life with a false accusation. Richard, in turn, was growing increasingly agitated. There was something about Jack Miller that deeply disturbed him, but he couldn't identify what it was. It was as if the past was coming back to haunt him. One night, alone in his office, Richard opened a file he hadn't touched in years. Inside, he found documents related to the Anthony Miller case. He reread the reports, the accusations, all the documentation he had used to justify the trainer's dismissal. At the time, he had been so sure that Anthony was guilty. But now, 15 years later, some things didn't make sense. If Anthony had really stolen the money, why had he never tried to get revenge? Why had he never gone to the press or tried to clear his name? Why had he simply disappeared without a fight? Richard closed the file quickly. He didn't want to question past decisions. He had done what he thought was right at the time. But why then couldn't he stop thinking about Jack Miller? Catherine Thompson noticed that both her father and the boy seemed to be carrying an extra weight these past few days. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't explain. She decided to talk more directly with Jack Miller. "Jack Miller, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. Where are you really from? I mean, where were you born? Where did you grow up?" Jack Miller hesitated. He wasn't ready to reveal what he had discovered. "I grew up in several cities. My parents passed away when I was little and I ended up living with different people." "And your grandparents?" "My grandfather has also passed, but he taught me a lot about horses before he went." "What was your grandfather's name?" Jack Miller looked into Catherine's eyes and decided to take a risk. "Anthony Miller." Catherine's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened and she took a step back. "Anthony Miller, the trainer. You knew him." "I was a child when he worked here, but I do remember him. He was an amazing person. All the horses obeyed him as if it were magic." "What happened to him?" Catherine looked around to make sure no one was listening. "There was some trouble about missing money. My father accused your grandfather and he left. It was a very sad time." "And do you believe my grandfather was guilty?" "I was too young to understand the details, but no. Anthony Miller was the most honest man I knew. If there was a theft, he didn't do it." Jack Miller felt immense relief. At least one person in that family believed in his grandfather's innocence. "Mrs. Thompson, can I show you something?" "Of course." Jack Miller took Catherine to the abandoned barn and showed her the diary and the photos. "I found all this yesterday. I think my grandfather hid these things before he left." Catherine carefully leafed through the diary, reading excerpts from Anthony's notes. "Jack Miller, this is incredible. Your grandfather developed techniques that are years ahead of what we use today. And there's one more thing. From what I understand from the notes, courage and white lightning have the same origin. They're from the same bloodline. That would explain why your horse is improving so quickly. It has the same genetic potential as white lightning. But it also means the race will be more balanced than my father imagines." "Mrs. Thompson, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course. Don't tell your father about this yet. I need to better understand what happened to my grandfather before I reveal who I am." Catherine nodded. "I promise. But Jack Miller, you need to know that my father, he is not a bad person. Sometimes he makes poor decisions when he's scared or feels threatened." "Why would he be scared of my grandfather?" "I don't know, but I intend to find out." That night, Catherine had a long conversation with Mrs. Hope. "Mrs. Hope, do you remember the details of the Anthony Miller case?" "Of course I remember, dear. It was one of the saddest things I've ever seen here." "Do you think he was guilty?" "Guilty?" Mrs. Hope laughed bitterly. "That man was more honest than a saint. He would never steal a penny." "Then who stole the money?" Mrs. Hope looked around and lowered her voice. "Between you and me, I always thought it was Samuel." "Samuel? But he still works here." "Exactly. At the time, he was going through serious financial problems. His wife was sick and he needed money for the treatment. Shortly after Anthony left, Samuel's problems were mysteriously solved." "Are you sure about that?" "I don't have proof, but I've always had my suspicions. The problem was that Samuel was your father's personal friend at the time. When the money disappeared, it was easier to accuse Anthony, who was somewhat reserved, than to suspect his friend." Catherine fell silent, processing this information. "Why did you never tell this to my father?" "Dear, at that time I was just the cook. Who would believe my word against the men's version? And now? Now it's too late. Too much time has passed. But if Jack is really Anthony's grandson, he is, then maybe it's time for the truth to come out." Meanwhile, Jack continued training courage using the techniques described in his grandfather's diary. The results were impressive. The horse was recovering not only his physical health, but also his confidence and speed. Samuel watched the training from afar and grew increasingly surprised. There was something in the way Jack worked with the horse that brought back memories of old times. One morning, he could no longer contain himself and approached the boy. "Jack, where did you learn these training techniques?" "From my grandfather, Mr. Samuel." And who was your grandfather? Jack looked the foreman in the eye and decided it was time to start revealing the truth. Anthony Miller. Samuel paled. For a moment, it seemed like he might fall. Anthony Miller. The trainer. Yes, my grandfather. Samuel stepped back a few paces, clearly shaken. Son, you shouldn't be here. If the boss finds out who you are... Why, Mr. Samuel? Did my grandfather do something wrong? Samuel didn't answer. He simply walked away quickly, leaving Jack even more convinced that there were secrets to be uncovered. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. 15 years had passed, but the guilt still weighed on his conscience. He had let an innocent man be accused of something he himself had done. At the time, his wife had cancer, and he had no money for the treatment. He had taken the money, intending to return it as soon as he could, but when they discovered it was missing, it was easier to let Anthony take the blame. His wife recovered, he managed to keep his job, but he could never forget the injustice he had allowed to happen. And now Anthony's grandson was there, on the same property, facing the same man who had ruined his grandfather's life. It was a cruel irony of fate. The next morning, Samuel went to find Richard. Boss, I need to talk to you. What is it, Samuel? It's about the boy, Jack. What about him? I already told you to watch if anyone is helping him. It's not that, boss. It's about who he is. Richard stopped what he was doing and looked at the foreman. What do you mean, who he is? He's Anthony Miller's grandson. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear the wind passing through the eucalyptus trees around the ranch. Impossible, murmured Richard. He told me himself. He's the trainer's grandson. Richard sat in his chair, clearly shaken. That's why he looked familiar. That's why that horse... Boss, there's one more thing. What? Samuel took a deep breath. He knew he was about to change his life forever. Anthony was innocent. I was the one who stole the money. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Richard looked at Samuel as if he hadn't understood what he had heard. What did you say? I said I was the one who took the money. My wife was dying, and I needed money for the treatment. I borrowed it, thinking I would pay it back later, but when they found out, you let me accuse an innocent man. I know, boss, and not a day goes by that I don't regret it. Richard stood up from his chair so abruptly that it fell backward. You ruined an honest man's life. You made me commit a terrible injustice. Boss, Get out of my sight. You're fired. Mr. Richard, please, out. Samuel left the office with his shoulders slumped. He knew he deserved that and much more. Richard was left alone trying to process everything that had happened. Anthony Miller was innocent. For 15 years, a good man had carried a false accusation because of his hasty decision. And now that man's grandson was there, facing him in a bet that seemed impossible to win. Catherine arrived at the ranch that afternoon and found her father in the office, looking out the window with an expression she had never seen before. Dad, did something happen? Catherine, I need to tell you something. Richard told his daughter everything he had discovered about Jack and about Samuel's confession. My God, Dad, you mean Jack is the grandson of the man you accused unjustly? Yes, and the worst part is that now I understand why he accepted the bet so easily. It's not just about the money, it's about justice. What are you going to do? I don't know, Catherine. How does someone ask forgiveness for something like this? By talking to him, telling the truth. And how am I going to look that boy in the eye and say I destroyed his grandfather's life based on a lie? Catherine approached her father and put her hand on his shoulder. Dad, you always taught me that a person of character is one who recognizes their mistakes and tries to correct what can be corrected. But how do I correct something like this, Catherine? How do I undo 15 years of injustice? By starting with the truth and letting Jack decide what he wants to do with that information. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Anthony Miller, a man he had deeply admired and had betrayed in the worst way possible. He remembered how dedicated Anthony was, how the horses seemed to understand his every word, how he had turned troubled animals into champions. and he also remembered how quick he had been to believe in the trainer's guilt when the money disappeared. The next morning, Richard went to look for Jack. He found the boy in the corral, brushing Courage with movements that were identical to those his grandfather made 15 years ago. "Jack, I need to talk to you." The boy turned around, surprised. It was the first time Richard had sought him out since the day of the bet. "Of course, sir." "You are Anthony Miller's grandson." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Jack hesitated for a moment, but decided it was time for the truth. "Yes, I am." "Why didn't you tell me that from the beginning?" "Because I wanted to understand first what really happened to my grandfather." "And what did you find out?" "That he was innocent, and that you ruined his life based on a lie." Richard lowered his head. "You're right. I committed a terrible injustice." "Why? Why didn't you investigate properly before accusing him?" "Because I was young, arrogant, and trusted the wrong people too much. When Samuel suggested that his grandfather might be to blame, I wanted to believe it because it was easier than suspecting a friend." "And now, what do you plan to do with this information?" Richard looked up and met the boy's steady gaze. "First, I want to apologize. I know this doesn't undo what happened, but I need you to know that I deeply regret it." "And second?" "Second, I want to offer to cancel the bet. You can stay here, work with me, learn all about the business. You don't need to risk yourself in a race against White Lightning." Jack thought for a moment before answering. "Mr. Richard, I appreciate the apology, but the bet stands." "Why? You've already made your point." "No, I haven't made it yet. My grandfather was publicly humiliated. His reputation was destroyed in front of everyone. If I want to clear his name, I need to do it the same way, publicly." Richard understood. The boy didn't just want private justice. He wanted everyone to know that the Miller family wasn't made up of thieves. "I understand. But you know that even though he's descended from the same horses your grandfather trained, it's going to be a very difficult race, right?" "I know. But I trust Courage, and I trust the techniques my grandfather taught me through his diary." "Diary?" Jack told Richard about the barn and everything he had discovered there. "Can I see this diary?" asked Richard. "Of course." The two went to the barn and Richard leafed through Anthony's diary with the same care that Catherine had. "Jack, these techniques are revolutionary. Your grandfather was years ahead of what we were doing at the time. That's why I'm sure Courage can win." Richard closed the diary and looked at the boy. "So be it. The bet stands. But now it has a different meaning for me too." "How so?" "Now it's not just about you proving you can win. It's about me proving I deserve a second chance to do the right thing." In the following weeks, the dynamic at the ranch changed completely. Richard not only stopped creating difficulties for Jack, but he began to openly help him. He provided quality feed, veterinary medicine, and even allowed the boy to use the best training tracks. "Dad, what changed?" asked Catherine. "What changed is that I understood what's really happening here. That boy is not my enemy. He is the opportunity I have to do something right after years of doing things wrong." Catherine smiled. It was the father she always knew existed beneath all that hardness. Mrs. Hope was happy to learn that the truth had been revealed. "I always knew Anthony was innocent," she told Jack. "And I always knew you were special from the first day you arrived here." "How did you know?" "Because you have the same look your grandfather had, determined but kind." The ranch employees also changed their attitude. Knowing who Jack really was, and knowing the story of injustice his family had suffered, they began to openly cheer for him. "He's going to set this whole story right," commented one of the handlers. "He's got champion blood in his veins," said another. But not everything was resolved. With just 2 weeks left until the race, Courage began to show strange symptoms. He was slower, less responsive, and seemed tired. Catherine examined the animal and couldn't find anything wrong. "Physically, he's perfect," she told Jack. "It might just be fatigue from the intense training." But Jack knew there was something more. He knew his horse well enough to realize it wasn't normal fatigue. That's when he discovered that someone was sabotaging Courage's food. One night, he stayed awake watching and saw a figure approach the fence with a bag in hand. He couldn't see who it was, but he saw the person put something in the feed. The next day, He saved some feed in a container and asked Catherine to analyze it. "Jack, there's sedative mixed in here," she said after examining the sample. "Who could be doing this?" "I don't know, but we'll find out." They set up an ambush the following night. They stayed hidden near the fence, waiting for the saboteur to appear. Around 2 in the morning, they saw a figure approaching. It was one of the ranch's longest-serving employees, someone who had always been kind to Jack. "Why are you doing this?" the boy asked, coming out of hiding. The man was startled and dropped the bag with the sedative. "Jack, I can explain." "Then explain." "There are people betting a lot of money on this race, people who can harm those who don't follow their orders." "What orders?" "To make your horse lose. They offered me a fortune and threatened my family if I didn't do it." Catherine approached. "Who are these people?" "I can't say. They'll kill me if they find out I told." Jack looked at the man with compassion. "How much did they offer you?" $50,000. "And how did they threaten your family?" "They said they would harm my children if I didn't cooperate." Jack thought for a moment. "I'll make you a proposal. Stop putting sedative in Courage's food and I guarantee your family will be protected." "How can you guarantee that?" "Because I'm going to talk to your Richard. He has enough influence to protect your family." The man hesitated. "And if you lose the race, people will know I didn't keep my part of the deal." "If I lose the race, I'll take responsibility. I'll say I discovered the sabotage and managed to stop it." "Why would you do that for me?" "Because my grandfather always said good people don't abandon good people in times of trouble." The next day, Jack told Richard everything. Professional gamblers interfering with the race? Richard was furious. "This won't stand." "What can you do?" "I can do much more than they imagine. I have contacts in the press, I know important people. I'll spread the word that any attempt to interfere with the race will be publicly exposed." And that's exactly what Richard did. The next day, local newspapers published stories about the race and the sabotage attempts. The public pressure made the gamblers back down. With Courage free from sedatives, Jack resumed intensive training. The horse once again demonstrated all his speed and agility. With just 1 week left until the race, Courage was in his best shape. He had completely recovered from his hoof injury and developed impressive musculature. White Lightning was also in excellent form. He was a naturally gifted animal, and without the sedatives he regularly took to stay docile, he was showing all his natural speed. "It's going to be a historic race," commented Catherine. "It certainly is," agreed Richard. "No matter who wins, it will be a spectacle." 2 days before the race, journalists from various cities in the region arrived at the ranch. The story of the humble boy challenging the millionaire had spread and captured the public's imagination. Jack was nervous with all the attention, but Richard reassured him. "Remember how your grandfather was admired by everyone who knew horses? Now you have the chance to show that the Miller family never lost that skill." The night before the race, Jack spent the entire night with Courage, talking to the animal and remembering everything he had learned from his grandfather's diary. "Tomorrow is our day, my friend," he whispered in the horse's ear. "Let's show everyone what we're capable of." Richard couldn't sleep either. He kept thinking about how his life had changed since Jack arrived there. The boy had given him the opportunity to correct past mistakes and become a better person. Catherine was anxious but confident. She had followed Courage's progress and knew he had the potential to beat any horse. Mrs. Hope prepared a special breakfast for Jack Miller, with all the dishes he liked the most. "For good luck," she said, serving the boy. "Mrs. Hope, no matter what happens today, I want you to know you've been like a grandmother to me these past months. And you've been like the grandson I never had, my boy." Race day dawned cloudy, but with no rain forecast. Hundreds of people gathered at the ranch to watch the event that had mobilized the entire region. Jack woke up early and went straight to Courage. The horse seemed calm but alert. It was as if he knew that day was special. Richard arrived at the stable, wearing his best suit. "Ready to make history?" he asked Jack. "Ready," replied the boy, with a confidence that surprised even himself. The race was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. It would be a 2-kilometer race on a track that had been specially prepared for the event. At 2 o'clock, Jack mounted Courage and did a light warm-up. The horse was responding perfectly to every command. White Lightning was also being warmed up by a professional jockey Richard had hired especially for the occasion. "It will be a clean race," Richard told the jockey. "I want you to give it your best, but without trying to harm the boy." At 3 o'clock sharp, the two horses lined up at the start. Jack looked at the crowd and saw hundreds of people cheering for him. He saw Catherine, Mrs. Hope, several ranch employees, and even strangers who had come from far away to watch. But most of all, he felt his grandfather's presence. It was as if Anthony Miller were right there, guiding him at that decisive moment. The race judge raised the flag. "Riders, get ready." Jack stroked Courage's neck. "It's now, friend. Let's show everyone who we are." The flag went down, and the two horses shot down the track. White Lightning took the lead, as expected. He was a more experienced racehorse, and his jockey was a professional. Jack kept Courage in second place, following the techniques he had learned in his grandfather's diary. It wasn't time to push yet. In the first kilometer, White Lightning maintained a comfortable lead. The crowd shouted, divided between the two competitors. Richard watched everything with his heart racing. Regardless of the outcome, he was proud of both horses. Catherine was openly cheering for Jack, shouting encouragement with every stride. At the 1.5 kilometer mark, Jack began to press. Courage responded immediately, closing the gap to White Lightning. The crowd fell silent. It was the decisive moment of the race. With 500 meters to go, the two horses were neck and neck. White Lightning was giving it everything he had, but Courage seemed to have endless reserves of energy. Jack remembered his grandfather's words in the diary. "A true champion isn't the one who runs the fastest, it's the one who never gives up." "Let's go, Courage," he shouted, "for you, for me, and for Grandpa Anthony." In the last 200 meters, something magical happened. Courage developed a speed that no one expected, passing White Lightning as if he were standing still. The crowd erupted in screams. Jack had won by 3 lengths. When he crossed the finish line, Jack dismounted and hugged Courage with tears in his eyes. "We did it, friend, we did it!" Richard was the first to reach them. "Jack, that was the most beautiful race I've ever seen in my life. Thank you, Mr. Richard, for everything." "No, Jack, thank you. You gave me the chance to be a better person." Catherine came running and hugged them both. "Dad, are you going to honor the bet?" "Of course I am. 8 million for the youngest champion I've ever seen." But Jack Miller surprised everyone once again. "Mr. Richard, I don't want the 8 million. "What do you mean?" "I want to make a different proposal." "What proposal?" "I want us to turn part of the ranch into a riding school for underprivileged children, and I want the school to be named Anthony Miller." The silence that followed was broken by the applause from the crowd, who had heard the proposal. Richard extended his hand to Jack. "I accept, but on one condition." "What is it?" "That you become my partner, not just in the school, but in the entire ranch." "Partner? You've proven you have the knowledge and passion needed to continue your grandfather's work. I need someone like you by my side." Jack looked at Courage, then at the crowd still applauding, then at Catherine and Mrs. Hope, who were smiling with tears in their eyes. "I accept," he said, shaking Richard's hand. The final revelation came through Mrs. Hope, who approached the group with an old envelope in her hands. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it, Mrs. Hope?" "Your grandfather wasn't just an employee here. He was the nephew of Richard's grandfather. You are family." Richard looked at Mrs. Hope without understanding. "What do you mean, family?" "Anthony Miller was the son of your grandfather's sister, Richard. He had a right to part of this property, but never claimed it out of humility." Jack and Richard looked at each other with new eyes. They were second cousins. "That's why you seemed familiar," murmured Richard. "It wasn't just the physical resemblance. It was blood of the same blood." Jack laughed. "So when I came here asking for a job, I was just claiming what was already rightfully mine." "In a way, yes," said Mrs. Hope. 6 months later, the Anthony Miller Riding School was inaugurated. Children from all social classes learned to ride and care for horses under the guidance of Jack and Catherine. Richard had completely changed. He became known in the region for his generosity and for giving opportunities to young talents. Courage became the most sought-after stud in the state, generating a new lineage of champion horses. And Jack, at 16, was considered the most promising trainer in the country. proudly carrying on the legacy of his grandfather, Anthony Miller. Samuel had gotten a job at another ranch, but before leaving, he sought out Jack to say goodbye. "Son, I want to apologize for what I did to your grandfather. Mr. Samuel, we all make mistakes. The important thing is to have the courage to admit them and try to make things right. You have the wisdom your grandfather had. He would be proud." "I hope so." On the day the school completed 1 year, Jack organized a special race among the students. Watching the children having fun and learning, he felt he had fulfilled the mission destiny had given him. Catherine approached him during the celebration. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that sometimes life's injustices serve to prepare us for something greater." "How so?" "If my grandfather hadn't left here, maybe I would never have met courage. If I hadn't come to challenge your father, maybe we would never have discovered we're family. If we hadn't gone through all these difficulties, maybe we wouldn't have created this school. Do you think everything happened for a reason?" "I think the bad things that happen can turn into good things if we know how to seize the right opportunities." Richard joined the conversation. "Jack, there's something I never asked you." "What is it? Why did you name your horse Courage?" Jack smiled. "Because when I found him abandoned on the dirt road, he was almost without strength. But there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't going to give up. It was the same courage my grandfather taught me to have, the courage to face challenges without ever losing hope. And now I know that courage is worth it. It's always worth it." When the sun set that day, Jack Miller was in the corral petting Courage. The horse that had arrived lame and malnourished was now strong, healthy, and the father of several champion foals. "Thank you, my friend," he whispered in the animal's ear. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself." Courage whinnied softly, as if understanding every word. Mrs. Hope approached with a glass of warm milk, as she did every night. "Jack Miller, your grandfather would be proud of the man you've become." "Mrs. Hope, thank you for taking care of me as if I were your own grandson." "You've always been my grandson in my heart, boy." That night, Jack Miller slept in the main house of the ranch for the first time. He had his own room, his own bed, his own family. But before falling asleep, he went to the window and looked out at the corral where Courage grazed peacefully under the moonlight. "Good night, champion," he whispered. "Tomorrow, we'll have another day to show that dreams come true when we don't give up on them." And so the humble boy who had arrived at the ranch with a lame horse became the young entrepreneur who turned a story of injustice into a lesson of hope and reconciliation. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story about overcoming and justice. Do you believe Jack Miller made the right decision by forgiving and moving forward? Leave your opinion in the comments. Your participation is very important to us.